Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the sixth webinar in our dairy research series this year. Today we're joined by Dr Padraig French from Teagasc Moorepark, and Padraig is going to look into what beef bulls, AI bulls, are suitable for the dairy herd. And this is obviously a strange time of the year maybe to be talking about it, but a very pertinent question given that we're in the run into when calves are going to be starting to be exported and sold again in the springtime. And it's been getting more and more contentious in the last number of years in relation to moving these calves off of dairy farms. So Padraig is going to give us a rundown in terms of what we can do as dairy farmers to improve the quality of the calf that's coming from the dairy herd to make them more desirable for our beef farmers to take on and to run into in dairy calf to beef systems. So I'll hand over to you, Padraig, about 15-20 minutes of a presentation or thereabouts, and we'll take questions as they're coming along, and I'll put them to you if they're appropriate at the time of the presentation, or we might hold them to the end. So thanks, Padraig.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, as Stuart said, I'm going to talk about what beef bulls to use in the dairy herd, but I suppose what specifically I'm going to deal with is the research that we've been working on in Johnstown Castle and in association with ABP and ICBF on selecting beef bulls for use on the dairy herd. And we've been working with them for the last 7 or 8 years in rearing calves, and I'll talk through that research. But by way of background, firstly, I'm going to just talk a few statistics about the dairy herd and how it has evolved over the last number of years. And I suppose there's three things, I suppose, in particular that I want to highlight. I suppose, firstly, which is very well known, the dairy herd has grown from about 1 million cows to over 1.5 million cows calving this year. Okay, so that's happened. That has coincided with a reduction in the suckler herd, which has declined from somewhere just around 1.1 million to probably less than 900,000 cows calving this year. So overall, an increase in output. But as well as that, we've seen a very significant increase in the usage of beef bulls on the dairy herd. And if you can see, the total numbers of beef calves coming from the dairy herd has grown from under 400,000 to over 700,000 over the last 10 years. And that has been driven by the dairy farmers initially during the early quota expansion period using quite a lot of dairy bulls on the herd, increasing up to about 65% dairy bulls, and I suppose in anticipation of the abolishment of quotas. But that has declined down now to just over 50% of dairy cows now are bred to dairy bulls, and the rest are bred to beef bulls. And we can see that has been dominated by Angus and Hereford, and the proportion of Angus and Hereford, the early maturing breeds, has increased significantly over that time. So if you look at those two breeds, and they make up, almost 600,000 out of the 700,000 calves that are born come from Angus and Hereford, are the early maturing breeds, with the Continentals holding fairly static percentage-wise in terms, but because of the growth in the herd, in absolute numbers are increasing slightly. Okay, so that's, I suppose, a major, evolution of the herd, national livestock herd over the last 10 years, the increasing of this sector, the beef cross dairy sector. It's very significant. What I'm going to talk a bit about is, I suppose, how dairy farmers select beef bulls at the moment that they use on the dairy herd. And you can see there the slide showing the percent, what influences the dairy farmer. When the dairy farmer is going out to choose a beef bull to use on his dairy herd, what does he look at? And we surveyed farmers back in 2017 to see what were their priorities, what do they put first. And it's very, I suppose, equally shared there between easy calving and short gestation. They're the number one things that farmers select for. They want, obviously, short gestation is very important in the later calving cows, because you don't want them dragging off the calving season. And obviously for the earlier calving cows, easy calving is very much also a priority. They are the younger cows in particular. They wanted those easy calving. And that's really why they choose those early maturing breeds, because they are associated with easy calving and short gestation. And also they use breed as a big thing in their selection criteria. And because the reason they choose on breed is because they associate breed with those traits rather than focusing within breed, which is what we're going to do later on in the presentation. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the beef merit of these calves. So we've seen that the numbers of these calves produced is growing very significantly. They're predominantly early maturing animals. And these animals are carried through to beef, usually as steers and heifers, and are slaughtered at probably close enough to around 2 years of age. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the issues we have with these animals is we're seeing a decline in conformation of these animals, okay? And there's a very big financial penalty if these animals drop below an O equals, okay? So, and with an early maturing animal, with the conformation that's there in the Angus and Hereford, when crossed to the average dairy cow, the average progeny is somewhere around an O equals. But if they end up at an O minus, you'll cause a big drop in financial output of the animal, because you're losing on the grade firstly of 6 cents a kilo going from O equals to O minus. You're losing on the quality assurance bonus that's there. And you're also losing on the breed bonus, which can be anything from 10 to 20 cents a kilo. So you could really, the difference between O equals and an O minus could be up to 40 cents a kilo at certain times during the year. And we're seeing that more and more of these beef cross dairy animals are falling off that cliff edge, going from an O equals to an O minus. And we think that part of that is because of a lack of improvement in the beef animals that are being used on the dairy herd, or lack of genetic progress on those animals. This just shows from our own work in Johnstown Castle the percentage of the calves across the different breeds that are that are not meeting that O equals threshold. And we can see there that the Angus has gone from 20 to nearly a third of them, from 20%, to the Hereford's gone from 15 up to nearly a third of the 15% up to a third of them. Whereas it's not really an issue with the Continentals, the late maturing, the Limousin cattle. And they're the 3 breeds we focused on for the last couple of years in Johnstown Castle. The research work, and that's what I want to go on to talk about now, is the research work that's happening in Johnstown Castle. In County Wexford. It's a collaboration with ICBF and ABP and the beef breed societies, the Hereford, Angus and Limousin. And really what it is a sire evaluation trial, okay? The objective is to identify the most suitable beef bulls for crossing on the dairy herd, and to, over time, if we identify those bulls, they'll be used back in the pedigree herd, and we get genetic progress within the pedigree beef herd. Right, so the structure of the program is ICBF identifies suitable bulls through the AI station. They're sourced from the AI companies, but also from some of the breed societies and from outside of Ireland. And those, the semen from those young bulls is used out through dairy farmers. About 7,000 doses of semen goes out every year and is used across the national dairy herd. About 3,000 of those calves are reared commercially on commercial farms. And when they're slaughtered, at whatever age they're slaughtered, the data will feed back into ICBF. But about 650 of the calves are produced and are reared as calves by ABP, which then moving on to Teagasc in Johnstown Castle. About 250 of them, about 400 are reared on a farm with ABP, where we can monitor them throughout their life. And 150 of them will go on into Tully for finishing, where we can measure feed intake and feed efficiency and methane emissions. And we'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so that's the structure of the project. The calves that are selected for rearing within Teagasc and ABP and ICBF are to be representative of all the sires that were used. So we get a broad spectrum across all the sires that are used in the program. So this is just, I suppose, an overview of Johnstown Castle. It's the Teagasc Research Farm down in the southeast, and we do calf to beef research unit there, where we take these calves that are weaned calves and rear them right through to slaughter very much under pasture-based systems. Okay, we have for the last number of years been evaluating these Angus, Hereford, Limousin beef sires. They come from Frisian cows, mature cows. They're not used on heifers. Okay, we bring in about 250 calves and we fin to carry them through to slaughter every year. Okay, the heifers are finished at the end of the the second grazing season, and the steers go back to grass for a third grazing season, trying to spread out these animals to see which systems they're suitable for. So the steers go back out to grow into bigger animals at 26 months of age to slaughter. Okay, and we evaluate their lifetime performance. We can measure intake on them indoors during the winter. We can measure their growth rates, their carcass weights, and we do a lot of meat quality work on them as well. Just, I suppose, briefly in terms of the breed comparison, we can see that the the heifers here, firstly, I say they're slaughtered at about 640 days of age, which is around 20 months of age, killing at a carcass weight of about 250, 260 kilos. Very small differences. Limousines are slightly older being slaughtered, slightly higher on carcass weight. But when you correct for age, it's very, very, okay? So we draft out these animals as they become fat, okay? Steers, similar effect. You're seeing slightly older age at slaughter for the limousines and slightly heavier carcass weights, but a big improvement in conformation with these late maturing animals, okay? And just don't quite get the same fatness as what the heifers have, but the average daily gain will be also slightly lower in the later maturing animals. But I suppose what's particularly interesting to us is not the breed comparison, but the within breed, and that's where we get the big variation. And this just looks at it by sire. So we have on the heifers, you're seeing that, you know, this is carcass weight per day of age, okay? And you're seeing across the Anguses, the group of limousines, or the group of Herefords, sorry, and the group of limousines. And you can see quite a big difference in actual carcass growth rate. You know, you're looking there at a difference of, you know, somewhere between 15 and 20% of the difference in growth rate in carcass weight per day of age. Similarly, on conformation, you're seeing at the same age and similar carcass weights, you're seeing the progeny of some sires are doing O pluses, of other sires are doing an O minus, you know, and that's just within the Hereford breed. Again, there was very little difference on average between the Hereford and Angus, but within the breed, you can see very, very big differences. And what we're seeing on the conformation, you're seeing specific sires that are very widely used, like this bull KYA is probably the most commonly used Angus bull on the dairy herd for the last 10 years. And, you know, it's quite poor on conformation. You're just struggling above an O minus on those sires, okay? Similarly, the steers, exact same trends as we see with the heifers. Big difference in carcass weight gain per day of age, obviously a slightly higher carcass weight, and similarly in conformation, you have the progeny of some of the Hereford and Anguses are really struggling to make it into that O equals, you know, and there's a lot of them hitting in the O minus, which is down here, versus you're up here with the limousines are getting into, some of them getting into ours, okay? So there is very significant differences across sires, okay? If we look at what effect that has on profitability, if you take just two sires, so these are both Angus sires, okay, and you take the two extremes that we picked out early on, differences in carcass weight per day of age, 0.35 to 0.42. Difference in conformation within those two sires, the progeny of one was no minus, the other was no equals. Very similar age at slaughter, but because of that, then very big differences in carcass weight. At a base price of $360 per kilo of carcass, you can see there's about €250 difference between the progeny of sire B versus sire A. You know, part of it is driven by the breed bonus because they're O minus. This O minus has a very big effect, but there's also the big effect of carcass weight. So very similar age at slaughter and very big differences in value of these two progeny, the progeny of two different sires, okay? And we saw similar results on the ABP farm. And this just, I pulled up one slide from the Angus sires that went up to the progeny of Angus sires that went into Tully. And you're seeing there quite a significant difference in feed efficiency. You know, some sires are, you know, they're getting high intakes and not getting the high growth rate versus other sires. You can see here, like these sires from the top, they're doing 1.8, 1.9 kilos a day, which is very high growth rate for finishing steers on a high and intensive diet, versus at the other extreme, 1.35 kilos and very similar intakes across it. So you have big differences in feed efficiency. And that difference in feed efficiency from the poorest to the best sire was worth about €100 over the finishing period, okay, in reduced feed intake. But that then also fed through to big differences in the emissions, or the carbon emissions or the methane production from these sires, okay? So what we have here is the methane emissions, the methane intensity, which is the kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of carcass weight. And if we look first within breed, so you can find it to within one breed, you take the best versus the worst is about 17%, okay? You take the best versus the average, there's about half of that, okay? If we go across breed, so you take from the best, from the 3 breeds that we had, you take the best sires from within the best breed versus the worst sire across the breeds, you're looking at about twice that difference, okay? So there is a breed effect coming in there as well, okay?
And that's been driven by carcass weight per day again and feed efficiency then as well, Padraig.
Yeah, it's being driven by high carcass weight with moderate intakes.
Yeah. So highly efficient at converting into body weight, basically. Yeah.
Into carcass weight versus other sires that have lower carcass growth rate, but similar intakes.
Okay.
If we look at, I suppose, the value, if we scale this to an industry level, and if we see, nationally we produce about 20 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from agriculture. And we have a challenge that we have to reduce that by 2.5 million tons. That's the target for agriculture by 2030, okay, over the next 10 years. And that's what the MAC is about. The Teagasc Marginal Abatement Curve is about how we implement that, how we get that significant reduction. And if we look at the number of beef calves, which is now up close to about 700,000 beef cross-dairy calves annually, that's growing. We know that it's going to be up at 800,000 very shortly in the next 2 years. And if sex semen gets more widespread use, we would see it exceeding in excess of 1 million, okay? We know that there is potential that with these animals of higher growth rate, we can achieve similar carcass weights and fatness to what we're achieving today about 1 month younger, which is a reduction in carbon dioxide equivalent about 160 kilograms per animal, okay? Scale that to the industry level. If we can achieve a 1 month reduction in age at slaughter, it's worth about 128,000 tons, okay, of carbon dioxide reduction, which is the equivalent of the carbon dioxide to producing from about 21,000 dairy cows, okay? So that's just 1 month. The average age of slaughter of beef calves coming from the dairy herd at the moment is close to 28 months of age. So there's a lot of potential there to reduce that, okay? If we take just and confine it just to these breeds that we were dealing with, the Angus and Hereford, the early maturing breeds, their average aging, though they're early maturing animals, is about 26 months, okay? The average within this trial that we conducted, the animals were being slaughtered at 21 months of age. If we look at the carcass weights of these animals, they're very, very similar, just a massive difference in age at slaughter, okay? The carcass grades, very similar. I say we're trying to kill to a constant fatness. And if you look at the stocking rate, if you look at the stocking rate that we're operating at, it's slightly higher than what's operated at nationally, okay? But I suppose the first thing, we talk a lot about carbon efficiency and the environmental impact. If you look at the economic impact of selecting these animals, okay? So this, I suppose, when you look at these national average versus the average for a child, the difference here is a management effect. The animals are being grazed more intensively on pasture, higher quality pasture, getting higher growth rate. The far right here, we're looking at if we select genetically better animals within that system of production. So you have combining high genetic merit with good grazing management and high performance from grass. You can see this higher carcass weight, potentially similar stocking rate, but again, higher output because of the combination of genetics and production efficiency. Look at it in terms of net margin per animal. You can see a very significant increase moving from where the national average is at the moment at 26 month slaughter down to where these trial animals are being killed at 21 month slaughter versus these high genetic merit sire steers that are being killed at 21 months at almost 340 kilo carcass. If we look at it again, net margin per animal, you're looking at about 75 euros more profit per animal, okay? Carbon footprint, you can see very significant reduction from about 11 kilograms per kilogram of carcass down to about 6 kilos. If you scale that to the national level, to the 700,000 cattle that are being killed, you can see there's a reduction of almost 1 million tons of carbon dioxide, okay? Just over 1 million tons. So that's almost half of what we need to achieve under the MAC. So if we look just at these 700,000 beef calves that are coming from the dairy herd, there is potential there to reduce 1 million tons of carbon dioxide by increasing the performance of these animals and using high genetic merit animals. Okay. Okay, so I suppose this is just, I suppose, summarizing what we've gone through already. You can see that I suppose the potential is there that we've identified. If we can move this age at slaughter younger, okay, by selecting better genetics. I suppose we don't want to grow animals into bigger, heavier carcasses. We want animals that can finish young off a grass-based system. So we need animals that are able to achieve high intakes of grass and get high growth rate. We don't want to breed animals for lower intake, okay, because that will only increase the age at slaughter. What we want is animals that can achieve high intake at pasture, get high growth rate, and finish off a grass-based diet, and finish relatively young at carcass weights that are within the desired spec for the industry. Okay, so I suppose that's where the beef side of it is, and from the beef farmer's perspective. But we have to bear in mind that all of these are coming from the dairy herd, and going back to where we were at the start, the dairy farmer is much more concerned about having a short gestation, easy calving sire, whereas the beef farmer, we know, wants high growth rate and good carcass quality and good feed efficiency. And the industry overall wants this environmental efficiency. So I suppose what we've been working with ICBF for the last number of years is developing this Dairy Beef Index, which was launched earlier this year. And this is an index that ranks beef bulls for use on dairy females, okay? And is balancing up, similar to EBI balanced fertility and milk production, which were antagonistic traits. This is balancing up calving performance and beef performance, which are also antagonistic traits. So what we want is easy calving, short gestation bulls with high carcass growth rate, good feed intake, that are docile and that are easy to rear, okay? So we developed this index with ICBF, and you can see the balance in the index. There's about 2/3 of the index is focused from a dairy farmer's perspective, because they're not going to use these bulls unless they're easy calving. Short gestation, I suppose, is an economic trait, and calf mortality, obviously an economic trait. But then from the beef farmer's perspective, there is carcass weight, I suppose, has a big weighting in it. Conformation, we saw, was very, very important. The ability to hit within spec, okay? So the ability of these carcasses to achieve that O equals or better, and to achieve this specific, the spec on terms of carcass weight, okay? And then I suppose on the other side, I suppose from an environmental or from other traits that are relevant to the dairy farmer in their small levels, being cold, being docile, and lower feed consumption. So if we look at this Dairy Beef Index, and we look at, I suppose, we compare the top 5 DBI bulls versus the 5 most used beef bulls, and this is work done by ICBF. And you can see that the top 5 bulls have a 57 euro higher Dairy Beef Index. Okay, they have 1 day longer gestation. You're compromising on slightly, very, very slightly. In terms of the calving difficulty, it's now broken out into calving difficulty on heifers versus calving difficulty on cows. Okay, so if we compare the previous the 5 most used bulls to these top 5 DBI bulls, you're getting very, very similar calving difficulty. You're assisting 1 less cow out of 100 and 1 more heifer per 100 in terms of a number of assists. So quite a small effect on calving difficulty, no difference in calf mortality. You're getting on average higher calf price by about 18 euros higher calf price. But you can see here quite a significant difference on the finishing. Like the animals are killing on average at 17 kilograms heavier carcass weight and 1 grade better. They're shifting up from the O equals to the O minus, or from the O minus to the O plus. Okay, so the calf is worth about 100 euros more, and is worth about almost 10 euros more to the dairy farmer. Okay, so the dairy farmer is benefiting, and the beef farmer is benefiting by selecting these top DBI bulls. Okay, so I suppose that's where I'm going to leave it, Stuart. If there's questions or comments on that, so I suppose covered a lot of stuff there in terms of the economics, the environment, and the new Dairy Beef Index.
Yeah, no, it's a good presentation, no, Padraig. Thanks very much. So there's just one question there from Michael Donoghue. Is there any relationship between the better conformation or higher average daily gain and calving difficulty? So I would say
Yeah,
that those better performers, are they actually more difficult to calve them?
yes, I suppose on average, when you look at the bulls, there is a positive correlation between calving difficulty and carcass growth rate. But we had a very similar issue with the milk and fertility. Fertility was negatively correlated with milk production, but by selecting on both traits, we were able to improve both of them. And that's really what the DBI is about. I suppose up until now, dairy farmers have been selecting only on calving difficulty and gestation, and they were leading to lower genetic merit beef bulls being used, okay? And I suppose what we're trying to do is get that balance right and putting positive emphasis on both the calving difficulty and the gestation, trying to make them easier, and on the other side, trying to improve the carcass weight.
Okay. Just out of interest, I don't know, maybe whether you picked it up now, but would there be a difference in the average daily gain between different breeds, or the different breeds in the different stages? So were there some of them performed better at grass and then performed better in the finishing phase, or were they consistent all the time? So were the best average daily gains consistent no matter what stage they were at?
No, I would say you would find that with specific sires, and this is there's a breed effect here, and there's also within breed, that certain sires, that once they get to a certain size, they will start laying down fat. They become less efficient. Their growth rate slows down, and that's a positive and a negative thing. Okay, if we want animals to finish on a pasture-based system, and we don't want to be dependent on high input grain-based diets, we want animals, you know, that achieve high intakes of grass, but finish at a moderate carcass weight, okay? But on the other hand, we have to balance that up with the spec required by the industry, which want a minimum carcass weight, okay? So within those breeds, say like the Angus and Hereford, now they have for their breed bonus, they have minimum carcass weights for heifers of 220 to 240, and for steers from kind of 240, and for the high bonus rates, they want 260 kilo carcasses. Now, the industry say they would like a 280 kilo carcass, the processors, but again, that's trying to get improved processing efficiency. So I suppose that's that minimum carcass weight that we have to balance with. But ultimately, if you get animals, the younger they finish off on a pasture-based system, the more profitable they will be, or the lower environmental footprint they will have. So again, going back to your question, is there variation? There is significant variation both within and across breed. Across breed, the limousines, much, you know, they're all growing very similar up to that 18 months of age. Then you'll see that the Anguses and to a lesser extent the Herefords will start laying down fat and will finish younger, you know.
Okay. There's just a question there from one of the participants that's not in Ireland. He was just wondering where can he find the best bulls to use on Holstein and on Jersey?
Yeah, so yeah, it's something I suppose that's relevant. We would have looked at these sires across Holstein cows and across Jersey cows. And again, if you're not in Ireland, I suppose it depends on the market that you're targeting. I suppose the Dairy Beef Index is selecting sires within all the breeds that we have available in Ireland. Now, some of these sires are coming in from abroad. Okay, there's quite a lot of them coming in from France, particularly some of the top bull on the Dairy Beef Index. You know, at the moment they're Aubrac bulls. A lot of that genetics is coming in from abroad. We would have tested beef sires from Australia, from New Zealand, and within the breed plan evaluation system globally, there would be some sires that, you know, are quite good to balance that calving difficulty, gestation, and carcass growth and conformation.
Okay. You said about the excellent grazing management, and we see it with Nicky's work as well in Grange. Like, is there any kind of nugget of information that we can provide to people in terms of how they can improve that grazing management? I think that quite often the B side is challenged by, it's difficult to manage the numbers at the time when you have growth, etc., and then trying to manage cow stock at the shoulders of the year and so forth. Like, in terms of paddock systems, or what do you feel is going to really drive the performance and get down that age of slaughter that you're talking about there?
So it's very similar to the way it is done in the dairy herd. It requires, I suppose, control of the farm cover. Okay, that you're putting animals in to, you know, relatively moderate yields of 12 or to 1,400 kilos of dry matter per hectare through the main grazing season. We do tend to graze the calves into lower covers. So particularly at the start, so we take the calves in the trial you mentioned there, the Nicky's trial, the calves come off concentrates at quite a young age, you know, at 2 months after going out to grass, the calves are off concentrates and they're grazing at relatively low covers through the early grazing season. They gradually build them up to slightly higher covers, up to that 1,100 over a few months. And hitting the residuals each time and graze it down. It's rotational grazing. It's, you know, it's relatively intensively managed rotational grazing where we control the farm cover, and it's slightly more challenging on this calf to beef unit than it is on a dairy unit, in that in the calf to beef unit your demand is going up drastically throughout the grazing season. So you have quite a low demand in the spring. You need high quality silage more so than in a spring calving dairy herd. You need this high quality silage, and therefore you need to take out a big area of first cut and cut early for high quality silage, because you have a low demand through April and May because the calves are eating virtually nothing at that stage. And you need to cut that first cut silage early. But then as you go through the summer, the demand is building up. The calves are starting to eat. The steers or the yearling cattle are getting heavier. So your demand is going up. I suppose at some point then either the yearlings are slaughtered or they're going indoors quite early to allow grass for the weanlings for the autumn. So generally, say within these systems, the yearlings would be coming in early October. They would be housed and they're put onto that high quality silage for finishing if they're not already finished before they get to the house. And they are the grass is prioritized for the weanlings.
Okay, and just in terms of the drafting of the animals, like you said that you were doing it in your situation, but is that a contributory factor to not hitting the spec in a lot of cases? Do you know, the penny cattle goes to the factory as opposed to maybe taking out the cattle that are fit?
Yeah, so I suppose there's different reasons why animals don't hit spec. Some of it is that they're overfat, and that's a big problem with the industry, that the animals are left there too long. They go back out for that third grazing season and they're coming in overfat. I suppose we try to draft to a constant fatness, and it's not just, I suppose, from a meat processor's perspective, because that's where you get the optimum price, but it's also from the efficiency. Like when animals are going over fat, they're very, very inefficient. Okay, and I suppose we want to hit a fat score 3. Okay, and as close as we can to a 3 equals on fat score, and that's why we would draft maybe fortnightly, go through them, particularly when they're coming close to slaughter. So that would be the heifers at 18 to 22 months of age. You know, fortnightly we'd be drafting out of those heifers. The steers, say Nicky in his study now would be taking out the Angus steers 20 to 22 months of age, and the Friesians would be kind of 21 to 23 months of age. They'd be coming out for slaughter, going through them fortnightly and picking on carcass fatness, you know, rather than on weight or age.
So that's just literally handling the animal to kind of make the judgment on the fatness score.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I suppose over time the eye would get trained into it and you get good at selecting them. You know?
Yeah, okay. Very good. We've no further questions there. So that's very comprehensive. So thanks very much for joining us and giving us a good rundown. There's some interesting, there's a lot of scope there in terms of from both the dairy side and the beef side, I suppose. So, right, we'll leave it at that. So the final one in the series will be on in December, and Patrick Owen will be talking to Marion Beecher about being labour efficient on the dairy farm. So thanks again, Padraig, for taking the time out today, and we'll talk to you all again. Take care.